Hello everyone, my name is Fatima Mahmood. Welcome and welcome back to my channel. This video reflects my own views and opinions, no one else's, and it's not been pre-approved or endorsed by any federal agency or other employer, academic program, or membership association. I'm doing a shorter series of videos containing federal application tips that others might consider different or a bit unusual. And by application, I'm using that as an umbrella term for the entire federal government hiring process. The target audience for this video and this series are job seekers for a federal government position or current federal government employees. However, people from the nonprofit and private sectors may also benefit from this information. Today's topic is sending thank you notes or emails right after you've completed a federal government interview, regardless of how well you feel you did in that interview. Nowadays, in a post-COVID world, people may still be doing completely virtual interviews. That could be a result of many of the employees who are volunteer interviewers, maybe teleworking at home or have mixed schedules, and simply the government may have decided that in the past, they might be willing to fly certain people out for certain rounds of interviews, but now they decided as a cost-saving measure, there's not a way to justify those costs anymore because virtual options should be virtually available to most people. So if you're having a virtual round of federal government interviews, you may receive an email beforehand from a scheduler or organizer. It may not be people that will actually interview you. And that email may contain the names of the people who would interview you, or they may not. Either way is fine from the perspective of the employer. And if you also might get like a calendar invite that contains not only the names of the people who interview you, but their email address. So you can and you should save that information. And then when you have your virtual interview, you should be confirming which people actually showed up, because it's perfectly acceptable in many regards for there to be last minute changes, last minute swap outs. So definitely take notes during an interview in general, but you can also take notes on who actually showed up to interview you at each of the rounds if you get to multiple rounds. Throughout my career, I've received and read different pieces of advice about interview prep. And one advice that I think is out there that is less helpful is this advice that you should always get the interviewer names before. That if it's not being volunteered to you proactively, that you, before the interview, ask for the names of the people who are going to interview you. And then in a more private sector mentality, there's this view that you should research all the names and find out things about the people who are going to interview you, and maybe take notes on that. And somehow, if an opportunity presents itself, you should have this personal information about these interviewers and potentially bring it up in an interview as a way to forge a link or bond between people. So sometimes the scheduler or the employer that's going to interview you will give you names. Sometimes they won't give you names. And sometimes if they give you names, the names can change last minute. I encourage you to never look at it as a negative if they don't give you names, and never look at it as a negative if the names change at the last minute. What I'm understanding is nowadays for first round federal government job interviews, it's going to be a structured behavioral interview. Maybe I'll do a separate video on structured behavioral interviews. But basically, you're going to be answering predefined questions that are the exact same for all candidates. So an opportunity for you to bring in personal information about your interviewers to establish a bond with them is less like an opportunity. You may still want to find personal information or research your interviewers beforehand if it makes you feel better, but if you are pressed for time preparing for an interview and you could spend more time preparing by learning about the agency, the office, and the job posting, I would encourage you to divert your time that way instead of researching your interviewers. So in sum, it's great if you can get the names beforehand, but never think of it as a negative or a deficiency if you haven't gotten the names of your interviewers beforehand and you didn't research them. So let's say you have an old school in-person interview that you're prepared for, and maybe you got the names of the interviewers, or maybe you don't. You walk in and you're meeting a whole new group of people. So hopefully all or some of them will have their business cards, so you can ask for the business cards. Sometimes people wait towards the end. Sometimes people offer it ahead of time. If I'm doing an in-person interview, and I start off by offering my business card so we don't rush it at the end, because sometimes the end is saved for the interviewee's questions, and I don't like to rush that person. I want the interviewee to have as much time as is available to ask their questions. So if you have your business card, that's an easy way for you to confirm who interviewed you. And I generally think it's a good practice in whatever interviews you do, is to always keep records of people, the names of people who helped set up the interview, as well as people who were participating in the interview. If you have a situation where one person or two people don't have the business cards, at least get their first and last name, and you can look at the standard way that government email address is generally written. Always be careful about emails, in that people may have an official first name, but at work their official email will have their official first name, but at work their first name that they use everywhere is a different one. So just double check that. And if you're in a situation where you didn't get someone's business card, maybe you have a contact in the agency, in your network, and you can ask that person to help you. Like, you shouldn't be shy about asking for that help. Also, if there was a separate scheduler who helped you, who notified you of the interviews, I think it's perfectly okay for you to email that scheduler and say, I believe this person was also in my interview. They didn't have a business card. Could you help me confirm that I have the correct email address for them so I can send them a thank you? And again, all this way you're confirming all the people who are involved in your interview, which is a good habit, I believe. I'm not going to make a video about how to write a thank you note or a thank you email after an interview, because you can go to Google and you can find lots of publicly available advice. One thing I will agree with the advice out there says, yes, you should write a thank you after any and every job interview, even if you think you did not do poorly. And it should be a polite and thankful thank you note. One of my main goals in this video is to convince some of you out there is to send your thank yous via email and not paper mail. Some people watching this video are of the personality type or of the age group and generation where they would never send paper mail, but there are still people out there who are believing in or wondering about sending a thank you note via paper mail as a way to distinguish themselves. And there's a couple of reasons why it should be email and not paper mail going forward. So I have a lot of respect for my fellow federal employees at the United States Postal Service who sort through the nation's mail and deliver it almost every single day of the year. But some people already know this and some people don't, that mail to federal government, especially in the DC zip codes, are irradiated. So all paper mail is first irradiated as if it comes through the US postal system. This is different than UPS or FedEx, which mail also gets scanned. So federal mail goes to a separate location. It is irradiated and scanned, and then it is still brought to the federal agencies. So before COVID, there was already a bit slowness in how mail was delivered due to changing times. And then post-COVID, there may be other procedural reasons why mail is a little bit slow. This irradiation adds another delay to receiving the mail. And sometimes the irradiations, I've experienced this firsthand being 15 years in government, the irradiation can alter a little bit the look of whatever is being mailed. True story, I had an office colleague who, some of us were new to DC, got a new apartment, and they didn't know if they were going to stay there. They'd have certain mail sent to their workplace, their federal workplace, This was a Nintendo game, old school Nintendo game. And the Nintendo games would arrive, he'd look at them, and the plastic would look distorted, and then you'd take them home and try to use them, and it wouldn't work. He did research, and he found out because of the irradiation, the plastic aspects that would be then interlocked into the Nintendo player would be irradiated and distorted, and therefore it became an issue in how to play the actual game on the TV screen, etc. So irradiation can also affect how the mail looks, so that might affect the paper card that you sent. I'm not saying it's always going to happen, but it could. If you found out that the government is not irradiating U.S. postal mail sent to federal agencies in the DC area, please message me. Sorry to belabor the point, but I want to share another example to convince those die-hard paper thank you note writers about why you should just switch to email, especially for business interviews and federal government interviews. True story. I was part of a group that interviewed a paralegal candidate. This person had previously had another federal government paralegal job and then had a break, did something else, and wanted to return to the federal government as a paralegal. In the interview process, in the rounds, was the paralegal boss, the deputy paralegal boss, and several paralegals. So this person wanted to stand out in the application process and in the interviewing process and wanted to write a handwritten thank you note to every single person. This individual, who had worked in federal government and knew about security issues in federal government, decided to arrive at the federal agency, go to the, what is a lack of a front desk, but the security guards before you enter the building, and wanted to leave all these paper handwritten notes with like a front desk type or with a security guard. Now, you may know, or you may not know, that when you walk into a federal building and first you see security guards, those are sometimes not federal employees. Sometimes they are federal contractors. They have restrictions on where they're allowed to physically go in the building. They may have an ability and authorization to do like a walk around round, but they may not be able to or allowed to go up to people and go into offices. So if you were to leave paper or anything with those people, they may not be authorized to hold on to it. And the security desk may actually not have a locked space or may not be a secure place to keep anything. And it simply could be a federal policy in that agency that the security guards or the people at that desk never hold on to anything. So to show up with several paper handwritten notes and wanting to leave them with someone in the federal agency who will then distribute it sort of out of the blue, this was a very awkward situation in my opinion. So what had to happen is the security guards had to find the phone numbers of the people that the notes were for and had to try calling each of them until one of them picked up at their desk and would come down, and that person collected all the notes and then had to distribute all the notes. So this was not a secretary, this was one of the interviewers. So this again is awkward and it's creating extra work, whereas the thank you note system shouldn't really create extra work for anyone who interviewed you. So to top off this real life story, when these notes were opened, the penmanship was not clear. So if you are in any situation where you're writing something by hand and you want to give it to people, to hand it over to people or mail it to people, make sure the penmanship is very legible. And, you know, penmanship, I doubt that it's being taught in schools today like it was taught in my youth, but be aware of the penmanship whenever you're writing something by hand and you expect people to be able to read it. So some people looked at this story and thought it was really positive and that this candidate was distinguishing himself in a positive light, and I thought this person wasn't doing that. It was doing the opposite, because I would have expected someone who was a prior federal employee to know the whole situation about a lack of secretaries, a lack of front desk for particular offices, and to know that a security desk is not a courier or deliverer of mail upstairs, and that the security desk, as a security precaution, is not going to hold anything. You may be in a nonprofit sector or a private sector where you are accustomed to every organization having a front desk or having people in titles called secretary, where things can be dropped off at a particular desk and they can be redistributed and they're not necessarily scanned or whatever. Just know that positions and titles like secretary are limited or decreasing in the federal government employer, and sometimes people in an office who have the responsibility for distributing mail, their title isn't secretary. They have a different title and they're doing multiple tasks and not just distributing mail. Also, some people might try to get really creative out there and try to access a mail room in a federal agency. And I don't think just trying to drop off mail to that sort of office is going to work, because again, scanning and for viruses, irradiation, there's all these federal procedures to just get something as simple as mail. So make your life less complicated and just do an email. While I'm not giving advice on what to actually put in that thank you note, because you can research that online yourself, I will touch upon some key points. You have to think about whether or not you're going to do a group email to all the people who interviewed you in that round at the same time, or if you're going to do individual emails. I recommend individual emails, even though that takes you more time. So I've had a unique experience where I've participated in interviews round one for potential attorney hires, and so the other people who were interviewing were attorneys and I'm a paralegal and I was on it. So that may be unique, and that may also be unique in federal government, but I remember the candidates who would email me directly even though I was a paralegal. I appreciate that. So another tip is these emails, these thank yous, you already know a lot of what you're going to write in there and you can pre-write it. You're going to say things like, thank you for interviewing me, I appreciate the opportunity, I learned XYZ, and always be specific. And even more specific, if you can remember specific things that individuals said, then you can put that detail in that individual email to the person. And of course, you're going to end on something like, I appreciate being considered for this position. I am serious about my interest in this position, and I hope to hear from you all soon. And the last tip is, compared to paper mail, you want to send this soon. Maybe you want to wait till the end of the business day and then in the evening time send it to show sort of having that professional balance of work versus personal. But you do want to send it fairly quickly, and you can if you pre-write a lot of it and you save a draft in your draft emails or in a word processing document. I can easily believe that in the world of online advice about thank you emails and hiring and interviewing, there are advice like make a video thank you and then put it in an email with a link. Maybe something like use color backgrounds or whatever, and have sort of fancy JPEGs attached to your signature so that your signature looks really cool. So that may work for other sectors, other industries, but my best advice for federal government thank you emails is keep it simple. Plain text, nothing too fancy, just get the message out there and send the message soon after the interview. So you've sent these emails and you're hoping that they went through and they weren't filtered out in federal government spam, which is a very deliberate thing. And then you get no replies. No one replies to you. So you can think that's negative, but there's a different way to look at that. So I had a boss who, because she was very experienced in federal government and because she received certain trainings, was very aware that in federal hiring, there is always this concern about potential discrimination and the safeguards that federal interviewers need to do to prevent the appearance of discrimination or actual discrimination. So if person A writes a thank you or follow-up email and person B also writes it, and then one of the various interviewers responds to person A, but person B never gets a follow-up email, then there is a legitimate question of why didn't person B get a follow-up if they ask the same thing as person A? Is that reason because of that person's protected categories, race, religion, color, creed, disability? age, etc. So my boss at the time did something and I agreed with it. She would tell all the interviewers that yes, it's okay for the interviewee to have your email address and it's okay for the interviewee to email you, but no one except me is supposed to reply to the interviewee. So if you get an email, you can forward it to me and I'll decide it is the standard thing that I'm going to reply to. And so, of course, a standard question that interviewees might ask in a follow-up is like, when can I expect to hear from you? Or where are you in the process now? Even if they've asked that at the end of the interview. And again, I believe in this filtering system. I believe that that was a good approach that my boss or whoever told her to do it picked. If we got to a position with that candidate where our office was ready to offer that person a job offer, and maybe we were the only ones making that job offer, or maybe we knew that other paralegal offices in the agency were going to give a competing offer, then my boss would tell all of us, here is that person's email in case you don't have it. I want everyone to contact that person. We just made them an offer, and please make yourself available to answer any question this person has because we really want for them to accept our offer. So someone could have a system like that, and obviously that system is not going to be public knowledge. You might need to have an internal government contact, like someone like myself, who knows about those types of approaches to tell you. So don't always look at no replies as something bad. So I want to discuss interviewees or candidates who have a disability. Something that I've heard from some of them is that all these types of tips, or the general tips that are out there for interviewees and following up on an interview, these folks with disabilities know them, but sometimes there are certain obstacles that happen during the interview that have a negative impact or create an unlevel playing field for these people that are not the same for people without a disability. So a person who has a hearing impairment and needs an interpreter, because the interview time generally is the same and it's set, and an additional minutes are not given just because someone has an interpreter. What has happened in an example is that things like catching the names of the people who are doing the interviews, getting their emails, those things were not as easy for that person with the disability as compared to a person without a disability in the same situation. And also think about ways in which a person who might have a visual impairment doing an interview virtual in person may not be able to get all that same information that I've been talking about because the interview time might be the same and there might be other sort of obstacles that weren't deliberate obstacles, but that just happen when you have someone with a visual disability compared to a person without that disability. Hopefully after all this advice and all this time, I've convinced you to send a simple thank you email after interviews, but also networking opportunities. Thank you for watching my video. I'd love to hear from you on email at fmahmood@wellesley.edu. You can also find me on LinkedIn at that address. And if you do send me a connection request, please go ahead and send me a note. Before you go, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. And please go ahead and watch my next video. Thank you.